it's a really spicy topic to talk about. It's like this is really spicy because there's so many angry people and there's so much hurt that is happening constantly on a day-to-day basis, and there's just so little change, and we all feel so very powerless to enacting that change that so desperately needs to happen.
Daedalus here. Before we begin the interview proper, I have to make a quick comment. First and most importantly, we encourage you to seek out help if you feel you need to, from anything to a major crisis to simply needing to talk things through with someone. To that end, we have provided some free resources for seeking therapy in the United States in the description box below. I'm also required to inform you that this interview does not constitute therapy in any shape or form and is purely intended as personal observations for educational purposes only. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Daedalus, and I am here with a licensed clinical social worker. We both met many, many moons ago at University of Illinois at Chicago, where you will find on Halsted Street between Roosevelt and Harrison the Jane Addams Hull House, which was one of these locations that Jane Addams Hull started her social work practice, which originally was intended in the late 1800s to start helping immigrants find resources they needed to integrate into society. Fittingly, if you turn left on Harrison from Jane Addams Hull House, you'll find the dorm where we ended up meeting back in the day. So I want to go ahead and let you talk about what you do and why it's important.
Thanks. Hi. So as Daedalus said, we met a long, long time ago at the dorms of UIC, which is where I did my undergrad in psychology, and then I actually got my master's from the Jane Addams College of Social Work through UIC as well. So aptly named because Jane Addams, as you said, got her start at the Jane Addams Hull House on Halsted, which is on our campus, which is really, she was the foundation of a lot of the social work. Presently, I am a individual psychotherapist. I work in private practice. Prior to that, I worked for 8 years in the school systems. And then I also have dabbled in some nonprofit work as well. Social work, you wear a lot of hats as social workers. There's so many different jobs, so many different things that you can do as a social worker, which is really cool. But all of them sort of underscore social justice, fighting for social equality, fighting for, or just being really advocates for people in general, but particularly those who are oppressed or less fortunate or, in some way need help. And so that's kind of the foundation of social work. You can go as micro as individual psychotherapy, which is what I do. And you can go as macro as going to, the Capitol and, advocating for policy change and things of that nature as well. So a lot of stuff in between that. Why it's important. I mean, social work in general, people need advocates. People need help with a lot of different things. And where my scope is right now and where I'm focused is the mental health aspect of things with individual psychotherapy. So we just got out of pandemic. For those
That
of you
was
watching.
fun.
I know, right? So fun. And during that pandemic, we saw absolutely insane skyrocketing numbers with anxiety and depression. We saw insane skyrocketing numbers with eating disorders, mental health crises, and just in general. You can talk to pretty much any hospital and they will tell you, our numbers have gone up very significantly since the pandemic in terms of mental health hospitalization and just people seeking services or being in crisis. And so our job as social workers is to help mitigate that. It's to help people sort of understand whatever's going on with them in terms of their mental health and working through it. Coming up with strategies in order to live better lives and ways to just really help improve quality of life. Um, and so it is really important to continue that.
Yeah, I think there's a temptation to sometimes use social workers as distinct or kind of a Swiss Army knife for, well, social problems. I don't. I really want to kind of comment on the level of training that you had to undergo. Like, I remember back when you were in getting your master's and how stressed you got about it, and like how much work had to go into this, and how much you had to do to become a licensed therapist. It's not by any means easy work. I don't think.
It's not. Yeah, it's a lot of schooling. It's a 2-year program to get your master's. If you're going full time, I did it part time because I worked full time while I did it. So mine was a 3-year program. But beyond that, you need 3,000 hours of active work before you can even sit for the clinical exam. So, and then you need at least 1 hour of supervision a week for those 3,000 hours. So yeah, it's a lot, and then you sit the exam, which is no picnic, and yeah, and then once you pass the exam, you have that, but then you keep up with, of course, continuing education units and all of that you have to have when you renew your license every 2 years as well. So it is a lot of work, um, and ongoing work too, but it's really important that that's the case because as everything, this field is ever changing, ever evolving, and we're continually learning new things. So you have to keep up with it.
So, what kind of qualities do you think make a good social worker?
Oh, that's a loaded question. um, I mean, I think anybody who has the passion and the desire to make change, to help people, to really truly want to understand the human mind, and, you know, just make a difference, make waves.
What kind of services do social workers provide in the realm of mental health?
Well, there's individual psychotherapy, which is just one on one with your therapist. And they use a number of tactics. I mean, any good therapist will meet you where you're at, and they will employ all of the different tactics that we have in our little toolbox that we have. So that looks like CBT, DBT, ACT, all these wonderful strung together letters that just essentially are different theories or modalities of you know attacking whatever mental health issue you might have, and strategies and coping and really uncovering and understanding what's going on. So there's the individual approach. There's group therapy, which could be a small group of like 5 to 10 people with the therapist, and you guys kind of work together. Typically, they have something in common, so that could be like an anxiety group or a depression group, or any like an OCD group. We see those a lot as well too. So there's lots of different sort of groups that you can get involved in, which there's a lot of data out there that supports just not feeling alone in the process, and meeting people who are struggling with the same things can be really, really helpful. So there's group therapy, couples therapy, if you're going through something in a relationship where you need some help. So you see people, a lot of times there's this like a stigma attached to it where people are like, oh, I have to like be on the brink of divorce in order to get couples therapy, or to even think about that. And we're advocating more and more for people who are in relationships to seek out couples therapy long before then. Just if nothing else, it's kind of like a maintenance where you can speak together and work on your communication skills and feel like connectedness and all of that, because no matter what type of relationship you're in, you run into issues and struggles. Everybody does. So that can be really helpful for people as well. Outside of that, there's different levels of care. So for me, I'm an outpatient individual psychotherapist. And so outpatient would suggest that, I can go on vacation and not have to worry as to whether or not like you're going to be okay. It's not, you don't need a higher level of care. You have people who are in what's called inpatient. So you're in a hospital, in a treatment setting within the hospital. People who are in inpatients are not able to maintain safety. And so they have to be supervised constantly. From there, you step down to what's called PHP, which is partial hospitalization programs. And that's where you might spend all day in a hospital program, intensive therapies, and that's usually about 5 days a week. And then from there, you step down to what's called IOP, or intensive outpatient hospitalization, which is where you're going multiple nights a week. So you go back to school, you go back to work, and you're kind of living your life a little bit more like you were before the crisis, but you still need that extra support. And then from there, that's when you step down to outpatient individual psychotherapy.
So, what should a person look for if they think they need therapy?
Well, so if a person needs therapy, it starts with looking for a therapist. And the truth of the matter is, it's kind of like dating, where you might not find the right fit right out first. You have to look for somebody who really just meshes with you. Each therapist out there who has credentials and actual training is licensed and able to provide the services. What we see is like 90% of the therapy being effective is based in therapeutic relationship and the rapport that you have with your therapist. And so it's really important that you feel connected to them. You feel comfortable with them. You can share things with them. That relationship is so critical. And so I really, really encourage people to spend some time really like looking at people's profiles. There's a number of different things here, at least in the US, where we have something called like Psychology Today, which is a website that you can go on. You can look for a therapist in your area. You can search based on your insurance. You can search based on the presenting issues that you have. And then you can search through all these different profiles that pop up. And you can find, based off of what their profiles look like, you can be like, oh, maybe this sounds like a good fit, or maybe not. And then I would encourage you to reach out. And then, typically most therapists will do either a free intake call or like a quick call where, you can kind of do like an introduction and see, if the vibes are right, if you feel like you drive well.
Yeah. I would add, as someone who is in therapy myself, you should check to find people that are covering your particular set of issues and your particular set of identities as well. So
Yes,
uh,
definitely.
this is especially true for a large proportion of people who are looking for help now, especially if they're LGBTQ, to find therapists who can accommodate that. Or in my case, I found a therapist who's good with men's issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a friend who right now is, struggling with some religious stuff, where she's just, not into religion at the moment. And she actually tried a therapist who ended up being a Christian therapist. And so she didn't realize that. And then when they met, obviously it was not a good fit. And so she's since moved on and, thankfully found someone else. But, just little things like that are important to you, or the issues that you're seeking, definitely read through, and don't be afraid to ask the therapist, hey, like, is this something you specialize in, or is this something that you know how to deal with? And any good therapist will tell you, like, oh, you know what, actually, this is outside of my realm, out of my scope. So let me go ahead and refer you out. Or like, yeah, absolutely, that's what I deal with. And, they'll take you on.
Outside of mental health, what other services do social workers perform?
So social workers perform a host of different services. So we have everything from working in hospitals, working in nonprofits, working in government and military, private practice, schools, a whole host of different places, and working with different issues, like a whole host of different issues. So be that, homelessness, immigration, LGBTQ, minority access, access to resources just in general, social justice, social inequality, fighting inequality. And, um, it just spans so much. There's so much there.
What would you say to try to mitigate the stigma of seeking out either mental health services or uh, welfare services generally?
Well, I mean, like, let's look at what is the source of the stigma, right? And so, for and those are two very separate issues, and there's two very separate stigmas that go along with that. And so I'm going to address each one separately. So the first one would be access to mental health services like therapy, right? And there's a stigma to that comes from a number of different places. One of which is, you look at the older generation. We call them the silent generation, actually, and these are the baby boomers, people who were, in war times, World War II, Vietnam, all of that. And they fight silent wars. They came back, they didn't talk about it. They didn't want to talk about it. And they sort of turned that trauma inward. And some people sought out services, but a lot of people didn't. And, they kind of looked at, mental health or seeking out services as like the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, right? Where it's like, it's only for crazy people or people who are mentally unstable and are, sort of on the fringe of society. And that's just so not the case, especially not in today's day and age where, we all have our battles, be it with anxiety, depression, again, just OCD, the whole gambit of different, things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, that we can still live our lives. We can still be active members of society without having to, sort of pause our lives to go into very intensive treatments. We maybe just need that outpatient treatment or just a little help to get through. And so there's been a shift, which is great, especially with Gen Z, where, I was on a call with a client and their roommate came in, they're like, oh, hey, you know what? I'm in therapy. Like, I'll talk to you later. It's like, oh, because for so long it was like, oh, like, let's whisper it. We can't even talk about it. And now we're just being wide open about it. Like, yeah, we're in therapy. This is great. This is so good. This makes me feel better. This is what my therapist said. This is, sort of the coping strategies that I've used, and I'm feeling better. And I think that has really, really helped sort of attack some of that stigma. But yeah, again, where does that stigma come from? It comes from a lot of different places in terms of media, the silent generation, like I said, just how therapy has been thought of in the past and how it's not okay to not be okay mentally. And we're actively trying to change that to it is okay to be not okay anymore. So that's the mental health aspect of it. In terms of welfare, there's a lot of shame that surrounds welfare in our society, which is unfortunate because, people fall on hard times. People are born into poverty. Poverty is a real issue. And, people need help. They need government assistance. And, a lot of stigmas that I see or hear about is, the notion that, oh, well, if they're on welfare, like they're so poor, like, they're like on the fringe of society again and just not like they're not working hard enough. They're not doing, they're not doing all the things that they could be doing. They're just living on the government's dime. And it's really, really sad because so many of these people are working incredibly hard and just, 3 jobs. They can't even get the food on the table, they can't pay the rent, and so they need this assistance desperately. But what they don't need is the judgment that goes along with that. And we live in a very judgy society, which again, that's social work is trying really hard to advocate and push against that stigma.
There are, I think, particularly in this realm, in many places, there is a system designed to make it harder to seek assistance. One of the things that I have noted consistently is that it is significantly more difficult for an individual to apply for aid and receive aid if they are single or in a smaller household, because the income requirements that are placed on this are so absurdly low that it's fairly easy to, like, it's like $19,000 something along the lines of the federal poverty level for a single individual. And like, the implication there is that someone who is making 20,000 plus is okay, and that's just not the case.
It's not the case. It's not the case at all. And it's really sad, right? Because it's just such a broken system, honestly. It's really, really frustrating as the social worker in this scenario, right? Like, where it's just, we're up, it's such an uphill battle for our clients because of everything you just said, right? There needs to be reform. There needs to be access. You're telling me that $20,000 is enough. Okay, maybe if you're living in the middle of nowhere, in a state that like you don't really have a high level of anything, but even then, like that's insane. Like you can't to live in here, like in Chicago, for $20,000 is you're living
Not happening.
No, you're not even living, not really. So, yeah, and it does make it really hard to access those services. And on top of that, I remember during COVID, I have a friend who lost his job. He was laid off, and he was collecting unemployment, and he was sort of flabbergasted because he's just like, wow, like I'm actually making more on unemployment than if I were to get a job right now. And that was, of course, during COVID times when they enacted certain,
they augmented unemployment.
Yeah, they augmented it
fairly
right.
considerably.
Right. So that was during COVID times when they augmented unemployment, and so but that definitely decreased his desire to go out and work and grind as hard as he had been, because what's the point? I can't even make a living. Like, and it's just not fair. It's a really spicy topic to talk about. It's like, this is really spicy because there's so many angry people and there's so much hurt that is happening constantly on a day-to-day basis, and there's just so little change, and we all feel so very powerless to enacting that change that so desperately needs to happen.
So yeah, that is a huge part of it, is that wages are chronically low, and they have not responded at all to increases in productivity. They haven't really responded to changes in technology the way you would expect. So people are stuck in a situation where they don't have resources, they don't have easy access to assistance, they don't feel like they can arrive at assistance, so they get frustrated. I feel like this has probably animated a significant portion of a lot of people I've talked to's mental health problems that have started to emerge over the last couple of years.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, tell me how you can possibly be super, super happy when you don't know that you can pay your rent, have a roof over your head, and put food on the table for your family, right? Like, that's, of course, you're going to be battling the mental aspects of all of that as well. And so, yeah, it just gets augmented. The harder your life is, the harder your mental health can be, in terms of that as well.
So it's not a question of, and this goes back to that stigma, it's not a question of a deficiency that you have. It is a question of your response to your circumstances.
it's trauma. It's a trauma response, you know? And so you look at what trauma is, and you know, these people who literally are food insecure, who are housing insecure, you know, there's so many pieces within insecurities that cause the trauma. And so if you don't have a consistent, if your basic needs are not able to be met, that's Maslow's law, you know. You have to have your basic needs met in order to function everywhere else in life. And so when you don't have those needs met, you're in a traumatic situation. You are trying to live your life. You're trying literally to live, and it's a struggle. And so, of course, you're going to be more predisposed to mental health issues. And again, it's not because there's a deficiency in you. It's not because genetically speaking, you are supposed to be this way. It's literally just a traumatic response to horrendous situations that you're put in.
As far as you can ascertain from your position, do you think that despite the fact that the situation is very difficult for a lot of people now, do you think there are opportunities for improvement that are emerging and places that you see sort of a light at the end of the tunnel?
So, yeah, you know what? Like, I do actually see some positive trends coming. You know, as we get further and further out of this COVID mess that we have been in, um, it's definitely an uptick in services that are being sought. But because of that, I think that there's more access to help, and so people are getting more help and are sort of getting better in that sense of you know, attacking their mental health issues, really understanding the root of them. You know, collectively humanity just suffered a crisis together, and so that brings us together in a lot of um, weird ways. We're trauma bonded, if you will. And so because of that, you know, there's a lot more understanding, a lot more um, work that's being done to recognize the importance of mental health. So, be that adding more mental health therapists in schools, adding, you know, funding and things like that to help different places within government, within police, within just society in general, and really trying to understand the mental health aspects of things and really working towards um, you know, reform because we need it so desperately. And we have a long, long way to go. And there we are also right now in arguably one of the most divided countries in the world. And it's tough out there. It's really tough out there to get any kind of reform passed or pushed through. But I think that the writing has been on the wall for a long time that mental health is really important and that we need to do something. And so I'm cautiously optimistic. Just say that.
Let's go with that.
Okay.
Uh,
I'm cautiously optimistic, but also recognize how far we have to go.
in terms of if they want to take action to try to get to these reforms, what would be helpful from your perspective?
From my perspective, honestly, it's voting. That it starts with elected officials who have the power to pass these bills and who to pass these acts and these reforms that we are pushing through constantly. Um, you know, so it starts there. You can just be an advocate, you know, be an ally, understand and recognize all of the injustice in the world and, you know, stand up to it as best you can and with whatever resources you have. And one of the most powerful resources that every single person has is a voice. And, you know, use your voice, make waves. Don't be afraid to stand up and say, this is wrong. This isn't right. This doesn't feel good. Um, you know, we need to change this.
Is there any kind of closing thoughts you would want to present before we go?
Just that we're collectively going through something right now, and we need to continue the access to services. We need to continue to push for reform. And we need to end the stigma against getting help for yourself in mental health capacities. You know, I think everybody struggles with something. And you shouldn't have to struggle alone, and you should never feel ashamed or um, afraid, really, to seek out the help that you may or may not need, and that it's a connection, if nothing else. And the more connected that we can be, I think the more positive change that we can see in the world.
All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for your time and for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.